morning, Your Holiness. I'd like to begin this morning by reviewing just briefly some of the themes that we talked about yesterday, and then also to pose a certain question to you that I think connects to the understanding we have of quantum mechanics and some of the implications of quantum mechanics for our understanding of reality. As you remember, yesterday we saw through the so-called double-slit experiment that the results of that experiment led to a necessity of two logically contrary or contradictory explanatory ideas. So in the one case, one set of results from the experiment led to an impression or an understanding in terms of waves. A slightly different experiment gave results which, when we applied inference, led to the idea of a particle. These are actually logically contradictory pictures. A single entity cannot be both a wave and a particle. Now, this feature of quantum mechanics
regrouping.
Young scholar.
Good young scholar.
Very good one.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to everyone, I should say. Yeah. This feature of quantum mechanics is very prevalent, namely that one phenomenon, one, you could say, result of an experiment, we use logical inference, leads to one picture of reality. A related experiment, a related result, leads to a contradictory picture of reality. Niels Bohr called this, the scientist Niels Bohr called this complementarity. That for a complete...
Complementary, sorry.
That for a complete account of the phenomena that we have, we need pictures of reality which are impossible to have at the same time. They are contradictory. Now I want to emphasize how... Okay, so we start again. One of the features of quantum mechanics, as I said, which is very different from classical mechanics, from classical physics, is this principle of complementarity. In classical science, you have many experimental results, and those experimental results all converge or create a coherent, objective picture of reality. In this case, the wave-particle duality gives us an example of something quite different. As opposed to coming to a single picture of an objective world, we find contradictory pictures of that world. And we find this again and again. This is not only in wave-particle duality. This is a common feature of quantum mechanics, and also, if we had time, which we will not do, relativity theory also creates, you could say, a picture of reality which is not given as a single objective world in itself. All right? Now, yesterday you commented and said, well, maybe there's a single essence but conceptual differences. That's actually quite an interesting idea. But I would say, and I don't know if Anton would agree, but I would say that quantum mechanics and relativity theory, that is to say modern physics, would say that there is no experimental way for us to determine that single essence, to come to a picture or an understanding of that single essence.
No,
so it remains hypothetical. And from the standpoint of physics, if it's only hypothetical, then we have no use for it. You could say. So then the question arises, is there an alternative strategy? Right? If we have a...
time said matter system.
So what about the concept of time? Wouldn't be considered part of the matter?
The concept of time?
Yeah, time. So in
Not
this
matter.
The concept of time. Gosh.
얘네 그 time 이 하루다.
Yeah. For example,
objectively 그 이야기 뒤쟁이라는 샤고면도.
So time exists, but you cannot ground it objectively.
You cannot ground time in an objective...
저 얘네를 떠야 돼.
But still you can conceive of time.
You can conceive of time, but this comes to actually something that George and I might be talking about this afternoon. That is to say, what is the origin of time?
So this this difficulty of concept of time suggests that something that can be conceived need not necessarily be groundable in objective reality.
In an objective reality,
Yeah.
other than what you experience with the senses.
Yes.
Yeah. For example, we would say that time is given by, for example, like a clock, where you have the tick-tock of the clock. You can ask whether that is objectively given in and of itself, or whether, that it has its own intrinsic existence, or whether that is given in relationship. Right? Is it given in relationship to the observer, for example? And physics...
Intrinsic existence.
디페전 너디베랑제사 그거는 타니 버스도게 다고 그게 지 전신류게 지강성당수 말이야. 편주는 지도 그러지 마.
그래서 다버지 레고다 용어부터는 수샤에 매버지. 근데 지질을 뜬.
편주 너디베 루그랑제사 다가 편주 중으로
Quantum physics la ngochi dendrup ko marval.
가.
Ngochi tombani ina consul dridore.
I think the part of the problem is, it's not a single essence and distinct identities. It was essentially identical, but conceptually distinct.
In other words,
because the notion of essence is rejected.
Yes, that's what I'm pointing at.
So the confusion here is that when it said that they're essentially identical, that doesn't mean they have to be essentially real.
They can be identical in being empty of
그냥
intrinsic
오지는 또 다들
existence.
슬랍도 걸고 오지 슬랍도 걸고 그냥
Yeah.
유랑 셈보
뭐랑 쓰면 고마워.
샤오 말아.
Kala tombaro datan rowa gyldila dridore.
Did you want to say something, Anthony?
Well, I mean, the notion of time for physics is something like that.
Yeah.
Because in physics, we do not want to explain what time is. We just, all we need is, we need some rules how to measure time. And this is done by clocks.
So it is it's a relational concept. It's a relational concept.
It's a
Right.
relational
You're not
concept.
interested in the essence of time.
The
You're
same
only
thing with
interested in how
space.
to measure it.
Yeah.
The same thing can be said of space, right? That it's a relational concept. Time and space, you could say, are relational concepts, and they are defined. Now,
so what language would you use? I mean, intrinsic existence is a kind of a Buddhist language, so no. So you want to elaborate on that?
The question here is whether the notion of what would constitute the kind of reality that you're seeking here. What is the term when you're using it? It's not intrinsically existent. What do you mean by that term? Because you're kind of using a Buddhist terminology there. What would be your own language for that?
For example, if we take the example of time, we both agree that it's a relational concept. It's a construct, which is labeled in relation to something else. So, and that suggests there is a rejection of something. So it's not objectively grounded. It's not intrinsically real.
that's right.
So what do we mean by? So this implies that anything that fulfills the criteria of that kind of objectivity is intrinsically real. something that is not relationally constructed.
I missed the last part.
Right. Right.
So
Something that's not relationally constructed is therefore intrinsically real, and the question here is, what do you mean by intrinsically real?
so
Would
what
there
would
be something?
Can I
Because
come
there's
in
a-
there?
Please.
There is
To
something.
Debesh.
I mean, I would like to quote here a famous philosopher, physicist, Ernst Mach. Ernst Mach lived in Vienna at the end of the 19th century, and he is the only person whom Einstein acknowledges of having him inspired for relativity theory. And Ernst Mach said something very important. He said, every statement in physics has to be a statement about relations between observable quantities. So physics is relational. We have in physics, it is the great success of modern physics, starting with Galilei, that we have abandoned the question as to the nature of things. We only talk about relations and how to measure them.
Когда the Mark Einstein gave relativity theory now to the Mark it on some Savanius in the chairs, a Mark Shadan welcome to Benalas. You move in the carres to Tigiomaris. You pension Dober more carres. Dotankas Dugures, relation Yang to Dugures. Then do welcome to Benalia, yet among Pucci.
Mix a room with you.
The mix room with Chula. Mix room with Chula. The Moton Yonetone. Mix room with Chula. Observed the Ganda. Munju Guchuli and non-pension in the Dotangas Dugure. Dober more carres. The dos drama though. You will be running carres. Check your modest and go to Guanalia, Yarjadu among Pucci. That on Deton change. Pension Dober more connected. Dotangas Dugures. And the Dober Namshar carres. Dotangas.
So I think we would say that since... Do you want to say something?
내가 니도가. 그게 objectively 자가 진짜 많이 그도를 편은 되게 어려. 다 되베고네. 다 샤나마도 매빈잖아요. 엔코 두두인다데 자가 좀 그렇다. 따고 당분이네. 딘 저가도 된 세베이나. 디산에 지금 pension 떠다 근데 떠도와 다 뒤장장에 잔주신 줘야 지금 몰라. 그러다 무분이 주직고 가서래. 또 동주 시작하네. 그 자유르잖아요. 니주메 인자 pension 지기와리 니주메 되버리. 니주잔 자고 다 떠니 샤나 모두 메 인자네. 뒤찬에 다 뒤중안에 떼고 그래야지. 다다 직송송. 다들 남중 아주 뒤들어봤다. 다 오늘 조금은 뒤들어봤다. 안도 공간도 송돼야 돼야 당근에다 가서래 유 뭐고 가리네 제가 유전 탄에다 저에 되버지더니 이미잖아요 군이 편주 숨지기도 안했다 자고리 사소를 라바이네 안에서 가가려서
No. So Holiness is wondering that given that there is this kind of similarity between modern physics way of looking at things in relational terms and then the Buddhists, particularly the Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy, perspective on things as relational. But it seems to be...
네, 야구를 마시면 다 쟤네 많이 연이 아니 왜미지 되는 저리 쓸어야 직사소 다 안도 공기 아주 가리네 다도 objectively 니고 거다 이네다 objectively 니야 여덟시 그러다 objectively 니야 여덟시 레디 이네다디 뭐문 진두자네 다 유전의 제네 다나 야가사 도시합진 거 다 고소
Now, because the objective is in the yoga is like
This is Sharon.
let's not read.
Dinia Mariceni, Utuche. That will make you dress at the Marva.
His Holiness is wondering whether there is a kind of two ways of, bringing up this relational perspective on reality. Now, so this is in response, relation to your question about.
Your question, Mario, your comment.
Your comment about this, reference to Mark, that how...
about what?
Ernst Mark.
Right.
His Holiness feels that perhaps there are two different kind of perspectives here. For example, in the case of Buddhist Madhyamaka, who rejects any notion of intrinsic existence, the reason why they felt the need they felt the need to come up with a relational picture of reality is because of the understanding that regardless of however much you search for the essence of things, they are unfindable. So this objective pursuit,
objectively not exist.
Right, the sort of pursuit of
So
understanding.
there is no way to pinpoint this is this. Yet there is a reality. Fact is there. Now, therefore, now there is no other alternative except connected.
Yeah, except to look at it in terms of relations, in terms of interconnections. So that's one way of looking at relational picture of world. So, however, in the case of physics, since the inquiry is motivated by understanding reality, so there is an assumption that you must be, find something.
No.
Uncovering the object.
No,
At that time,
At that time,
the 19th century.
Historically.
19th
century.
Right, and therefore, what Mach said was a big step forward.
Yeah.
For that very reason, you just pointed out, in 19th century, there was really this feeling to search for reality.
Oh.
And what Mach said was a big step forward. But he said, no, it's about the relations.
저자도 공기
You see?
두두
It's a very
유중원의 니아 매대버지 가서 우리 통내 에네 두두시고를 시고.
So in that case, would you say Marx's kind of insight is to point out that actually this objective quest for objective reality is in some sense kind of untenable.
Illusory. Yeah, it's illusory.
Untenable. So therefore,
Illusory.
illusory.
Well, in the same way.
Even at that time.
Even at that time.
And that's at the end of the 19th century, inspiring Einstein and also other physicists. And I think one of the things that's interesting is it's not only a philosophical point, although Ernst Mach was a physicist, he was also a philosopher.
Right.
But he was anticipating the evidence. He was anticipating the results of relativity and quantum mechanics, which support this kind of view.
So may I ask, just so for him, looking for the relation between objects was not another means of getting to objective reality. In fact, he had abandoned the search for objective reality and decided the only way to go was
objects. He said between
observable
quantities.
Quantities.
And quantities is actually a bad translation into English. You cannot translate the original German well into English. It says, it would be something like observables, anything, so some things. A very diffuse word we use.
But in any case, the
So
question.
what is the exact meaning according to German word?
Beobachtbare Größen.
So the real meaning. What is
Größen means magnitudes, sizes. So it's an attribute. It's not. Größe means magnitude, size, how big something is. So it's not a word describing essence. You see, it's a word describing an attitude again. It's a character.
Professor Singer also speaks German.
We have another comment.
He also speaks German. Größe. What is Größe? Beobachtbare Größe.
What you are saying about this relational ontology, I mean, it must have a correspondence in the brain, in the apparatus that does the cognition. And it actually does have, because there is increasing evidence that all the brain can do is evaluate relations. It has no access to absolute values, to scalars. It always compares, it establishes relations, it can't do anything else. So the circle closes.
Yeah, wonderful
Very
point.
good.
Wonderful
That's
point.
nice.
The question that came up here, though, was whether that move toward relations was just another way of trying to get to some kind of objectivity, or whether Mach had actually abandoned objectivity.
I think he pretty much
Well,
abandoned.
there's just a question of methodology, and you give up the
Well,
idea that there is no such thing as a solid, independent reality.
As to the historic question, what Mach's position is, I don't know. But the way physics went afterwards is to basically give up reality more and more. Like if you look at, there's another famous quote by Bohr, Niels Bohr. And he says, it is wrong to think that to believe that the task of physics is to describe reality. The task of physics is to describe what we can say about the world.
보고 시간 제베나 아니 다주디 더 뭐감 리베기 다 지레가 줘봐 task 디 아니 뭐베네주 디세제레스 제라베나 노브레스 뭐감 리베기 아니 차와카레스 라베나 뭐베네주디 가져주부터 먼저 대시잡 두그레스 제제 how much we can say 가져주부터 줘 두그레스 제제
Martha Farah also has a comment she would like to introduce here.
Actually, a question, and the question is: are we talking about metaphysics or are we talking about epistemology? It sounds like these physicists that you're quoting are
abandoning metaphysics.
They're making a statement about what we can know. And they're denying that we can know absolutes. They're saying we can only know relations. But that's not the same thing as denying that something other than relations exist. Whereas when I hear relational ontology, that sounds like we're talking about what really is.
And that's the gist of what His Holiness
That's the
is
question.
commenting
Is there
on.
a veiled reality behind what you can know?
I think it's fair to say there are some differences of opinion on this amongst physicists. But I think Anton and I would, I don't want to speak for you, but at least I would say there isn't a veil behind which there is an ontological, metaphysical reality, which we cannot know, but we infer the existence of in some remote way. No. We tried that. We keep trying it. And as I was saying, physics, quantum physics in particular, says if it's behind the veil, it's contradictory. It keeps coming up with contradictory pictures. There's no coherent or consistent picture of what's behind the veil. And therefore, why not just abandon that project and say, you know, what this is telling us is this is a wrong direction to go.
Okay, but it just seems to me that what the last two things you just said are subtly but importantly different. So let's abandon this project. Says, you know, sort of, it's not my job. I'm a physicist. This is what physicists can do. You know, I don't do windows. I don't do ironing, to go back to a breakfast table conversation. I do relations because that's all my tools will let me do. But that doesn't necessarily imply that you know anything about reality.
Right.
It just says that's not my business as a physicist.
Yes, and I'd say the majority of physicists take that view. They're agnostic. They just stop. But, I don't know, at least I'm a philosophically inclined physicist, and Anton's, I think, a pretty philosophically inclined physicist, although he might deny it. And so therefore there's a question in my mind, and I think it's a question here, is there an alternative? A kind of ontology which is consistent with what the data say from physics, and which provides a different view of reality. And it's one that I'm interested in with regards to Your Holiness's book, where maybe I can read a passage that deals with something of this and ask you to go further. You say, for example, in your book, according to the theory of emptiness, any belief in an objective reality grounded in the assumption of intrinsic independent existence is untenable. Right? So there's a theory of emptiness. Yeah. This sounds very familiar, very similar to what it is we've just been describing. Yes. Yeah.
But there's a difference for me.
Please, go ahead.
There's an important difference. And to me, and now we come to a point which has been essential to our discussion all the time. To me, the individual event, the individual click, which is random, which we cannot influence, to me is the only evidence we have of some reality existing. The rest are pictures. You know, the wave, particle.
The phenomenon.
These are just
is what
pictures.
Right.
These are just pictures. But this individual event shows us that there is some reality
objectively
which we cannot influence.
So you would call that objective reality?
I would call the click objective, because we all would agree that we hear something there. What it means, what's behind it, how we view it, is a completely different story. But this very simple, primitive fact, I think that is beyond debate.
That's 가서 그게 유중원의 루드가 임치 봐. 다들 유중원의 루드가 인도산에 됐다는다고 하면서 와. 다들. 안 됐다는 다시 규진께서 말다. 규집에게 준적이 된 줄은 말다. 그 때는다고 된 줄. 디샤비는 다디 때는다고 하면서 와. 그런 거 좀 봐. 유중원의 루드 봐.
So from your point of view, that click is not relationally defined. It has an objective existence by virtue of its own essence, by virtue of its own nature.
I would go that far, yes,
Yes,
and see how the reaction is. I would go that far and see how the reaction is.
So this 가. 가서 런지면 mentioned 다른 캐는 거다.
So and this is fine, because even in the Buddhist side, there are many schools. In fact, except for Prasangika, even one of the branches of Madhyamaka, the middle way school, accepts that. They would want to
accept the Prasangika. All Buddhists accept that. Yes, this is objectively. Yes, should be. Yes, okay, no problem. So that's just that contradiction. That did then
So now the point is that this click, this primary phenomenon, is not dependently arisen.
Right.
That the 되게 안 되지 않아. 코란지요. 때 공부도 시작하고 가셨다.
So in that case, Marx.
Marx.
So how would Marx's comment fit in respect to this observation that you are making?
So there's no problem. Objectively, we can pinpoint.
Yeah.
So why? It's relying on observer. Why?
Why is? Sorry, I didn't
So
understand.
His Holiness's point is that if we can assume at least this primitive form of reality that is totally objective, unrelated to observer, and so on, then why would Marx say that you have to abandon the search for objective reality and look at it from a different angle?
Well, he said. He said every statement has to be a statement about relationship. No, he's saying every statement in physics has to be a statement about the relations between observable quantities.
Yes.
Physics come in when we have a couple of those clicks, and when we want to understand the relations.
Interpretation.
Understand.
Then the physics come in. And this is what Marx says.
That's true.
Okay.
Yes, there's no problem.
Could we ask
Right.
Evan? Evan has a comment here, I think, as well.
Just to make
That's interesting.
To make a philosophical clarification about Mach that I think will address John's question and also Martha's and some of the comments of His Holiness. So Mach's point philosophically is that the concept of reality is empty if reality is defined in any way separate from observables. The only content that can be given to the notion of reality is in terms of observables. So it's not as if conceptually you have observable defined as observable of reality. It's rather reality is defined in terms of the observable.
But
Okay, so that's point one. Then point two, on the clicks, it seems that the clicks are dependently originated in that sense of observable, as I just elucidated with Mach, because they're there because of a measuring device. So there's a dependent relation between the device that you're using to observe reality and what arises given that device, and that's dependent arising.
No, I disagree.
Oh, okay.
그 가사 양아도 뒤셔야 되거든. 통문주찬 디 진지로디 게르잖아요. 디 요리스. 디 가서래. 통문주 그 유진의 맞잖아. 디 유명 타지 못해야지. 딘에서 가갔다.
His Holiness feels that that is a slightly different point, because yesterday we had a discussion of how existence or reality of phenomena can be only understood in relation to an observation. So that was, and then the discussion centered on, from the Buddhist point of view, that would be seen as talking about an evident facts. So observable can be translated as evident facts.
Were you okay, George? Did you want to? You had a point?
But and this,
I think so.
this also connects to something, as Holiness was saying earlier, that we didn't actually manage to translate, which is the question of what kind of objectivity are we talking about. And one of these lower schools that His Holiness mentioned was the Sautrantika school, according to which basically the criterion of something existing is that it has a causal capacity. And the basic causal capacity that's often used is the ability to create a perception and cognition. So it sounds like here what we're appealing to here for our criterion of reality is that the fact of being able to create a perception or a number, to create an effect in consciousness, that means the thing is real. So we hear the click and we say, okay, it's real. Yeah. So that's actually not even really Madhyamaka anymore. I mean, we're down to even a lower level of interpretation where reality consists of these particulars that are perceptible.
Matthew would like to add
I think one of our purpose of our meeting was to deepen His Holiness' book and to raise challenges. So it is quite true that the lower view of Buddhist view would agree with the definition of the click being real, but precisely what we would like to hear, I think, and everyone would like to hear, is precisely what His Holiness says in his book, that in ultimate investigation, this is devoid of reality. That's the view of the Prasangika, which would challenge that point of view, and maybe that's what we would like His Holiness to explain, how this would challenge, not the lower view agree with that point of view, but what will be the final investigation that will say that it is actually devoid of intrinsic reality.
Yeah, what is meant by that, devoid of intrinsic reality?
So that's what we would like maybe His
And
Holiness to.
what is meant by intrinsic in that sense?
So
that's what the quote you gave His Holiness is based on that view, and maybe we should request His Holiness to explain that to us.
So in fact, if someone were to interpret this as suggesting that what we can observe does not exist, from the Buddhist point of view, that's a form of nihilism. From the Prasangika's point of view, that's a form of nihilism. If you reject what can be observed, then it's a form of nihilism. So His Holiness was saying that maybe when there is an appropriate point in the discussion, maybe he can elaborate on the question of intrinsic, being devoid of intrinsic existence.
Okay. Pardon me? Now, somebody said now would be a good time. Maybe we can... So would you... So when you say that it's a primary phenomenon that is objectively real with respect to the click, are you talking about the observed phenomenon of click? So the question is, are you talking about the observed fact, which is the click that you hear, or you're talking about what caused that click, which is the hitting of the photon?
No,
so
the reality is the photon.
So would you go to...
The photon
so it is some kind of... The click is a symptom of it.
It's an expression or a...
No.
The click is not the photon.
The click, to me, the click is the primary something we talk about. The photon is already a mental construction.
But click is a sound.
Well,
it's an experience.
It could, you could also make it,
flash of light.
Build a flash of light or a hammer hitting you on the head. It doesn't matter. Must be something like that.
Some things like that. So
David Bohm once said that objects, which were the old you might say the physics of classical physics was described in terms of objects, but those objects were really mental constructs, and that the objects have been replaced by what he called events and processes. We no longer speak in physics in terms of objects, we speak in terms of events. Now that event can be a click, it can be a flash of light, it can be a color appearance, but the event is the important primary. It's the foundation. Then we can interpret, on the basis of that, a causal stream, a story, a set of pictures. But those can actually be contradicted. I mean, they're not contradicted, but in a different frame of reference, your story will be different than my story.
It can be mutually exclusive.
Can be mutually exclusive. So
right.
The story which Anton tells will be consistent for him and his frame. The story that Arthur tells will be consistent for me in my frame of reference, but they will be mutually incompatible, right? What does that say? It says that there's a consistency, you could say a lawfulness, but it's relational. It's not objective and out in the world, it's always relational to the observer.
Earlier, His Holiness was saying that
the link is the same for everybody.
Earlier, His Holiness was saying that one of the big problems that seems to be arising is what do we mean by the English term reality? The term reality is being used in so many different senses, and it has
so
many
it
different...
creates a lot of
confusion.
Confusion, right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a bit.
Because what we are saying is that there is something rather than nothing, but you are not interrogating the ultimate nature of appearance. So reality can be the world of appearances, but then also reality could mean that there is some intrinsically existence reality. And when you are speaking of contradiction, it also means, it could mean the same as devoid of intrinsic existence. I mean, it's not
Yes, I think that's possible.
intrinsically a wave, it's not intrinsically a particle, they're not contradictory, they are just showing that these are not intrinsic properties that are permanent, that are autonomous and linked with that particular event.
But
Yeah, sorry.
But also, they could also simply mean that there is an observable event, and you said we all hear the click, and then we have different interpretations, inferences, JPOC, on the basis of this click, and you say one set of things about what causes the click, and you say another set of things that causes the click, and they contradict each other, but there's no question that the click is real.
That's the point, yeah.
There's no
And
doubt.
There's no doubt
There's no doubt.
that the click is real, and we might say the click is real objectively. And we would say in Tibetan Rangingune it's objectively real. And you're not going to say there's any problem with that.
Right, the events are the primary. I mean,
But that's different. That's
Yes.
different than saying the events of the primary is one thing, and this is part of what
You have
Matthew is
no
pointing to.
arguments, it is truly existed.
사실 대한 샤오초나 이집이 우서부터 제공을 했다.
No. So in that respect,
다음도 공간한테 써야 돼.
Narim, so from Anton, from your point of view, in order to accord reality to something, it has to be done only in relation to an observation. It has to be an observed phenomenon.
I would agree, yes.
Risha,
그래.
Risha.
우서 뭐 주고나?
You know,
So what about before the observer's existence?
I did not say that the observer has to live at the same time as the observed.
딱 그래 모두 샤워 주나?
Narim.
유쟁기 딱 통랑 판에다 샤고래.
뒤냐보요 말이죠.
이제 그니 두두집에서 오지 말이야.
That's good.
딱 가서한테 나도 드시면 통원민주 시집이나 우서버디는 요아래 우서버디면은 요마스 주로.
So yesterday we had a discussion about the kind of the reality of the evident facts in Buddhist language, the observed phenomenon, and without an observer or without an observation, the facts do not exist. So Evan, that you brought that up.
Was that a question? I'm not. I didn't quite understand the.
진짜 안 듣지. 우서버 내가 보는데 예배디 다 꼭주로 다시 되면.
So would you agree with Anton's point here and say that
안톤 말해. 안톤이 가서 그래. 유 남샤 줘야 돼 유진 때버렸어. 그래지 유튜브야 돼 유진 두보다 뒤념 고 말이지. 맞습니다. 뜻이지. 이게 지금 말이죠. 딱 가서 통원민주가. 봐. 그러나 가래 가서 드시면 볼로나 같이 샤오나 루세. 근데 가만히 봐도 다 주도 말이야 저러다. 봐. 다디 제지 로티 여러 그도래 그서 가래 그 제지도 말이지 이네 지 현지민소로 책이서 계속 어 디디디
His Holiness is wondering.
다들 observe 뭐 주고 열어요 말해
So,
observe 뭐 주고 열었어 obviously
Anton's point seems to be clear because he's saying, you know, in order for a phenomenon to be real, although it is defined in relation to an observation, but the observer need not be at the same time. So that seems to be clear. But yesterday we had this discussion about the evident facts and their relation to observation, and a suggestion was made. You know, example was given. Was it you about there being a? I think it was George's example of there being a ball inside a box, and so until you open the box and see it, you cannot really decide what color of ball it's in there, and so in that respect. So in this case, the reality of the observer, the existence of the observer and the observed phenomenon, would you say they are simultaneous? Or is it more like Anton's position?
In other words, that the object is real or established at the same time as the observer or not?
I was speaking in terms of classical thinking. Anton is speaking in terms of quantum thinking. And the point I was making is that Anton was not talking about looking at balls and boxes.
Oh, okay.
So my answer to your question.
That's right. Yes.
Want me to answer the
question? Yes.
In classical thinking, in classical thinking, which is naive, the color of the ball in the box has always existed. In quantum thinking,
yes,
which is extremely enigmatic, at least to me, is that the color of the ball is that the color of the ball comes into existence when I open the box.
Yeah.
The classical tonashebe and the polytundo the Daniel Nemene Tamponi Yoris. Quantum thinking tonashebe nas and the polytundo the Kamachebado Yoris Latumaris. The grand is Japanese
now. But it could come into existence also for the past at the moment I open the box.
And then polytundo the Kamachebado Yomaris. And the Kachitu Galas, polytundo the two trubas of the Masebe, Tingung Tule, Trubas Shaturis.
Let me try to make that clear with a ridiculous example. Inside the box, there is a person with a paintbrush and a ball. And 100 years ago, he painted that ball, and now he's dead of old age. And now I ask the question, what color is that ball? Classically, naively speaking, it is either red or green. Quantum mechanically, when I open the box, the entire past 100 years of history spring into existence.
Classics to the Shebena, Mijdinan Dedi, Tunda Chuna, the Tunda Lojango and Chubana, Chubaran Dedigris, Quantum to the Shebena.
Quantum to the Shebena,
so, would you say from George, would you say from the quantum perspective, you cannot talk about 3 tenses of the time, past, future, and present?
Anton, help.
This is back to, in some sense, Schrodinger's cat and something called delayed choice in quantum mechanics. If the state is prepared in a superposition state of red and green, you're in the same situation that you were with Schrodinger's cat. If you had a random event triggered the painter to paint red or green, then the state is a superposition state throughout all of that time. And as long as the system is completely isolated, so there's no contact with the rest of the universe, then it proceeds to evolve in this ambiguous state, only collapsed into one or the other at the time of measurement. That's the way I would speak about it.
그래서 그 사람 변주 직송송아 디지털 어떤 마음을 좀 잡지는 것은 나 패지 두서 야면서
지금 시작하고 찍고 그래서 그런데 superposition이라고 봐. 이미 네가 그 찾으셔야지. 뒤에가 볼때 아니 지금 쉐베다 리뷰용도가라. 그것도 뒤 다시 제거 봐. 다시 두고라 아니 신에 이마다 남샤 남이 제도 그랬어. 뒤부터 아니 이미 네가 찾내지. So would you say that until the observation is made, which decides whether it is whatever it is, either or, until that point the state is all in the superposition where there is both either or together?
You can have a long-term superposition state, yes. Yes, I mean, it's difficult to achieve in fact, but that's in principle the case.
Principle.
Are superpositions established independent of the observer?
Yeah, I mean,
so they exist in a sense objectively.
They.
Oops.
The state. There's a.
No.
네가 이 배차지 뒤져 봐. 다티 유전 되고 말봐. 유전 태연 되고 알고 지도 되고 알아. 다 objective 참고 유전마도 얘기.
They also exist in relation, but not yet with your consciousness. They exist with relation with the whole world.
They can't because they're totally isolated. So.
If we go back to the Bohr saying, physics is not about the world, is what we can say about the world. So the state is what can be said about the situation. Now you have to tell me whether you consider something that can be said about the situation as objectively existing or not. I don't know whether you can attach.
Why can you say something
to such
about
a
it?
thing like that objective existence?
What is your evidence for saying something about it?
The way I can, because I have some knowledge about the system prior to the moment when I want to make my statement, and what my statement basically is, the state is the essence of all possible future results of possible future observations, probabilistic prediction, and that's it. And I have learned in doing earlier experiments that that way to proceed works. That's it. Now, is that objective or not? I don't think.
Well, it still
objective.
sounds like what you're positing is some kind of, let's say, a quantum whole, as some kind of entangled state that you're just not part of as an observer, but still you're positing that as independent of you.
No, the state is just my way of describing the world.
Describing the world. But it still sounds like there's a world that's not...
I have the earlier clicks, and based on these earlier clicks, I make up a story. And that story is called the quantum state.
Okay. So that's... Arthur sounds where you were kind of going...
Well, I was putting a little more emphasis on the reality of that quantum state, but I can see how Anstan's picture is a perfectly consistent one. Wolf, did you have something that you wanted to contribute at this point?
Yeah, it's a naive question. I get puzzled because the cognitive instruments that we are born with that help us to survive and did so throughout evolution, they must be extremely well adapted to something, otherwise we would not exist. And they, for example, are heavily based on causality, on prediction making and all those things. Now, it just so happens that these very same instruments, when we use mathematics and instruments and look into the world, come up with a picture of the world that doesn't fit at all these primary sensations. Now, what are we going to trust now? The instruments that allow us to build atomic bombs and make nuclear reactions, or the instruments that get us throughout life without having to know about all of those details, because the processes in this world are completely irrelevant for our existence, except when we want to make an instrument or project a projectile somewhere. Now, finally, it's ourselves again who will have to judge what is the relevant part. And so I think we are turning in an enormous circle, which just shows us that our cognition is limited. And we will have this discussion for years and centuries, and we will not have a solution to it.
Well, I agree. I agree, but there's one point I don't agree.
Oh.
The one point I don't agree is the elementary nature of the click. Because I would claim that any living system which has learned to adapt to the world must have some notion of an elementary event. Like, you know, something hitting it on the head, or a tiger jumping out suddenly, or something like that. It must have the notion of an elementary event. And in that sense, the elementary event, I would say, transcends all these questions. And therefore, I think it's so powerful.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Because I think this is actually connecting to what I know from previous discussions, has to do with what one might call conventional reality, in some sense classical reality, the world that actually matters in terms of evolutionary dynamics, right, is a world of experience. And the lawfulness of those experiences is part of classical physics, and classical physics is also, you might say, embedded in quantum physics. So there is that conventional reality. And then there's a much more subtle analysis, which is much more like what quantum mechanics and relativity does, which looks at the most subtle and refined measurements we have of the nature of the constituents of that reality. And then we find this ambiguity, right, which actually has very little, you might say, to say with regards to evolutionary history of the human species or large-scale events. And this reminds one of some of the things that you've written about in your book and other discussions that we've had. I think now would actually be a good time to speak about this theory of emptiness, the nature of the two realities, to in some ways bring this into a perspective from Your Holiness's standpoint. I think there's a lot of interest in the room, not only in the quantum physics, but also to hear from you specifically about, well, how is it you account or think about the nature of reality? We see that in the sciences we have, on the one hand, these subtle critiques. On the other hand, we have extraordinary lawfulness with regards to evolution. How do we take these two dimensions of reality seriously? They seem to be at odds with one another.
Of course, I have no such ability. Right? I think this subject is very, very important. In any case, those subjects which often you see create more confusion, that itself is showing more complicated. So really worthwhile is the further discussion, and I think discussion between the scientists, those specialists in this particular field, and Buddhists. I prefer young scholars rather than my age. I cannot say I'm a scholar. I'm just a student. I think the younger generation of Buddhist scholars, I think their task, it is extremely important. So I think both position, both sides, I think should be complete open, anything possible. Buddhists should not take our own sort of position. Anything can possible. That way, that kind of attitude.
Openness. No?
And scientists, I think generally, that kind of openness. With Buddhists, I think that through years, somehow we indoctrinated.
also scientists.
maybe okay. So I think it's really worthwhile. 하더라도 여러분, 그렇게 마삼 때도 누가 도대체 땡땡 가서 그래. 단 익적을 중요하잖아. 그래. 그래서 체도 이준데 좀 인터성에서 가서 귤. 애는 아주 배배면에 지금 만에 다직 삼로 구양고. 양 일본 너무 여대 봐. 다 싫어 쳐, 싫어 싸워, 싫어 밀어, 싫어 싸워 상황고도 와. 다 든지기 타네. 그래서 또 심주지한테 빼게 하지 버리셔. 양 안에서 렁루로 직심체. 뒤에 계시게 맵체. 저 용시보다 저 타봐. 상로 구양 것이다. 그래 봐.
His Holiness feels that His Holiness feels that this is a very important and also quite an exciting area where the young Buddhist scholars can play a role in trying to kind of really meet with the insights of modern physics and the whole question of how do you reconcile what we see in this kind of very subtle level of reality and the macroscopic lawfulness that we experience and the conflict that we experience there. And in this respect, he was pointing out that the need for actual translation of reliable texts from the physics side into Tibetan. And here we have Laktola, who is the director of Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, that is in charge of the scientific education in the monastery, and also Professor Nawan Samden, who is the head of the Central Institute for Tibetan Studies in Sarnath. So if maybe they could take responsibility
and you
of...
can also see. Certainly.
And
so, oh yes, certainly.
So we can take responsibility of ensuring that there are reliable texts that can be read by the young scholars. And on the part of the young Tibetan scholars, there needs to be a genuine openness so that there is no attachment and clinging to one's own kind of established classical Buddhist standpoints, but rather a true willingness to open oneself and then engage with these insights and the challenges in a very deep way, so that with the attitude that I'm open to kind of modifying my views and embracing whatever comes up in the process of that kind of engagement, and that would be really helpful.
On the other side of that, though, thank you very much. I think that would be a wonderful project. But one would hope for the same kind of openness in the scientific community. That is to say, not only can we offer something to the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but also, of course, you have a very elaborated, beautiful system of your own philosophical thought exactly on these same subjects. And so it's important for us to receive a comparable offering from your side. And in particular, I think there's still a desire, even today, even now, to ask Your Holiness, well, from your standpoint, if you were going to speak to a group of scientists, and you have a few here, but this will lead to a book, and how would you approach this very issue?
다 남배 또 상으로 tenjib을 잘하면 tenjib을 가다 때는 중에 ten중 다 디젤리도 한다. 준대 ten중스 다 직세. 나빠서 뭐 개란데. 다 되네 때는 따고 써야 되냐. 그 차셔를 때는 따고 써야 ten중 직리도 와. 다 뒤에가 뭐 무슨 거다. 해질리가 써버려 뒤에 오비스지. 다전에 무튼도 sometimes 안에 따고 때네 따 써야지. 근데 차진 다 뭐 가도 가이네. 다 뭐서를 할람도 쭉 가도 가이네. 그 차진이 드리미도 그 차를 때네. 다 두등이지. 차를 때네 따고야지. 그 차를 때네 따고야기 모두 투수도 가도서 내가 또 걸어서 코로 차진 코로 시안을 때면 상황도 되지. 매번 인사 그 시안을 때네. 아니 다 도주마도 매들지. 그봐. 다 두두두 세르잖아. 그 때네 따고지 인신절이야. 한다. 고랑게 가서 우리 그게 된디 탄예디 주세 된디 디리스니 유중원에 저서 제매들지. 뒤에나 아니 때네 따고 하면 또 호사진 줄. 그봐. 근데 차징 뭐부터 그걸 시안을 때미기. 근데 뭐지 비치듯이 시험을 시시하니. 그래서 시험이나 그 시안을 떼고 하게 됩니다. 디 모두 샤이르즈는 시안을 때네 따고 하게 됩니다. 자꾸 시안을 때네 따고 하고 그 당도 뭔것이 용대도 와냐라. 때네 따고 고아라 그래서 시험이네. 그 때네 따고 뭔것이 내용도 와. 자 때네 따고 내용이 되기 그 시즌 내도 그것도 없으려나 그 탄년도 세 된디 된중원에 매들지. 이해 매들지. 자 된중원에 많이 받지. 그 매네 많이 받 말이 그 된중원에 주주고 민자 따유 잠기 다 정시집에 있잖아요. 디레 차로 괜히 다들 자들잖아요. 그 냐면 줄거다. 자, 디레 있잖아요. 의미지. 다 독식을 따버려 되네. 다 좀도 샤스 거죠. 야자네. 샤 말했다고 대마도 들었으면 좋아. 자, 디도 안에 엔다 차지 자리들이 그 때는 중앙 자기들이 그 자주 얘들도 시야. 리얼리티 시야. 다 리얼리티 모두 가르스는 있나? 뭐 축도 가르스는 야 말이지. 타니스야 세대. 내가 하고 싶지 않아.
So that's all I
That was
can
a long
remember
one.
of this.
That was a big one.
So His Holiness was saying that in some ways actually.
그러지 말래 왜? 그래. 그냥 건지 잡자 맞아서 들고 말해.
So he says
I have to
first,
seek their support. Yeah.
first
They are your team.
Yes, my team, yes.
So in some ways, His Holiness was saying that most of you are already familiar with the Buddhist perspective on this, and the key element of the Buddhist perspective here is the principle of dependent origination. And the principle of dependent origination has been understood at different levels and in different senses in the Buddhist tradition. At its most kind of fundamental level, the principle of dependent origination is understood in terms of coming together of events and things through a relationship of causes and conditions. And that is the basic level of understanding of dependent origination that is common to all denominations of Buddhist schools. But however, if you look deeper into the implications of this principle of dependent origination in terms of causes and conditions, you can go further and in fact understand.
것이 전이 때는다고도 말이지 그 주세야 주의모로 차야 거라 그 저을 때는 시하고도 믿어 봐. 다 자식시소. 다 때는다 봤어요. 세상에 주디 저을 끼어 말거다. 윤재기 된주도 말이지. 따고 때는다고 된주가 내용도. 다 대참에 먼구지 때는다는 용관.
So, but however, if you reflect deeply upon the implications of this principle of dependent origination, then you can go beyond the understanding of dependence only in terms of causes and conditions. So because if you remain only at the level of causes and dependence in terms of causes and conditions, then in the case of cause and effect relation, the relation is only one directional, from effect to the cause. The effect is dependent upon the cause, but cause is not dependent upon the effect. However, if you examine that relationship more deeply, you will understand that even the very identity of something as a cause is contingent upon the definition of effect. You cannot define something as a cause independent of the effect. So the very identity of what is cause is contingent. It is relational. It is in relation to something that
so
it
causes
produces.
themselves aren't, in some sense, real.
Yes.
They do not have intrinsic existence.
They do not have intrinsic existence.
And also themselves are conditioned.
And in this context, we will understand that the relationship is not only unidirectional, it's both ways. There's a kind of a mutuality of relationship. And in this way, we will also understand the notion of relational concepts. But generally speaking, there are very obviously relational concepts, like His Holiness did not give the example, but he probably meant Rinpoche Tungushin to say the word. So His Holiness did not give the example, but I think he meant the very obvious relational concepts like length, long and short. You know, you can make sense of something short only in relation to the concept of long. So he was saying that you could extend that. So you could extend that to, in fact, entire phenomena. And here it would be, because everything that can be conceived of can be conceived of in terms of some kind of wholeness. And when you conceive of something as whole, you already understand it as something constituted, which means it is constituted, there are constitutive elements that together make that identity. So once that is the case, then the very identity of that thing as constituted and as whole is dependent upon the constitutive elements that together make that reality. So in this way, you can extend the concept of dependent origination, not just in terms of causes and conditions, but even in terms of their very identities as wholes. As wholes.
But the relationship between parts and wholes, so that you're speaking about constitutive elements making up the whole.
The parts. The parts and the whole.
parts.
Yeah.
does it work the other way as well?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Both ways.
That the
There's a
parts
mutuality.
are in some sense constituted or out of the whole.
Out of the whole.
So again, there's no primacy to one or the
One
other.
or the other. So there is no
That's very
primacy.
important. So there's no primacy to cause and effect.
Yeah.
Because they are mutually dependent. There's no primacy to parts and wholes. They are mutually dependent. They codependently arise, I guess,
Exactly.
as you just speak about it.
So then His Holiness was saying that then the question is, if that is the case, then you cannot, if the very, not only the existence, but if the very identities of the things are contingent and composite in this relational sense, then what exactly is reality? Can we think of the ultimate reality? Can we conceive of reality that is over and above and beyond this relational framework, beyond this mutually dependent, mutually defined relational framework? Here, through the Madhyamaka analysis, we get to a point actually we cannot find anything. If you objectively try to ground reality, going beyond this relational framework. So the why Madhyamakas ended up choosing the relational perspective is not because there was a choice. It's like out of no choice. I mean, that was the only way to go. It's not because this was a kind of a better strategy. Right. That was the only option left. So the fact that
as I mentioned before, the reality there, fact there, it works. So there must be something.
Yeah.
But we can't find. Then only alternative is designation. That designation,
yeah. So it's their identities are constructed in relation to something else. So that's the meaning of conceptual designation. So
could we say a little bit more about that, because we've talked about causes and effects, wholes and parts, mutually dependent. The role of the observer. We've been talking a lot about the observer. So in what sense is there a relationship there?
So this is the third level of understanding of dependent origination. So we have the dependence in terms of causes and conditions. We had this dependence. So even at this second level of dependent wholes and parts, there are Buddhist schools who still assume some degree of objectivity to the
things must be there.
Something
as a real.
Even though they are dependently designated, there's still a sense that there's some kind of objectivity even within dependent designation.
So then from the perspective of the third level of understanding of dependent origination, which is dependent in terms of conceptual designation, then the question is raised that if there is something objectively, so for example, one of the Prasangika masters, Buddha Palita, says that if things and events can be defined objectively, then we can point that out and say that's the reality. Why would you then need to talk about relational in terms of relational concepts? So what Buddha Palita is doing is, Prasangikas are doing, is to show contradiction between the notion of dependent arising and the notion of objective reality, objective independent reality.
On that level.
On that level. Yes. So all the discussions that we are having here it's actually from the perspective of dependent origination, not from the perspective of emptiness.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if so from the perspective of emptiness, even the observer ceases to exist.
Empty of intrinsic existence.
Intrinsic existence. Yeah.
So dependent origination has these.
Then we slide into nihilism.
Right.
Unless you understand correctly, you get the impression, oh, nothing there.
Nothing exists.
Nothingness.
Did I forget something?
That was a brilliant and extremely concise summary. Thank you very much for that. it seems to me that this is also, just speaking personally from the standpoint of physics.
I think I may add something.
Please.
You didn't translate it.
It's okay. No.
Okay.
I wanted to
Add some
one add. I think this theory not necessarily come as a as I understand about the reality.
Dependent origination.
Oh.
Yes.
But I don't understand this.
Yes. No.
Now this theory main purpose is our mental attitude, grasping everything. This is positive. I want. This is negative. I hate. Now that comes from the grasping.
No, clinging, grasping.
Object as well as observer oneself. So now the only countermeasure for that is the understanding of the ultimate reality or shunya, or nothingness.
Emptiness.
No, emptiness.
Emptiness.
No observer, no object.
So His Holiness's point is that if you look at the Buddhist theory of emptiness and the teaching pertaining to the theory of emptiness, which from the ultimate point of view rejects even the reality of both observer and the observed phenomena, it is really done not so much out of an inquiry into searching for the reality of things, but rather to assist us in overcoming this deeply ingrained kind of tendency to cling onto things, which then give rise to all sorts of dysfunctional relationship with objects and our own existence. And in order to kind of counter that, the teaching of no self, the teaching of emptiness is presented. But in the process, when the insight into the selflessness or emptiness is taught, then the question of reality comes up. What is there then?
No, I think this is actually a place we should draw to a close for the tea break. I don't know maybe if the question is a short question, but if it's going to lead into a large discussion, I think maybe we should.
I can't predict that, but it is directly related to.
Well, then let's at least put it onto the floor, and we'll see if we can take it.
I have a question for Your Holiness about the explanation of dependent origination that was just given, and it concerns the third level of the conceptual dependence on conceptual imputation, or dependence on concepts. So the question is, where in that framework does the concept come from? What's behind the question is, must there not be some source in experience for the concept formation? And I would like to relate this to Wolf's point, that must there not be, because of the kind of structure we have, the brains we have, some kind of fine-tunedness or adaptation over a long period of time that makes us have those concepts arise that then play that role.
로인 남샤디리야 몽구치다 몽구시빌 당연하다 방금 계속 주물이 또버도 도미니 이어차 표정 안 주디 배제 나로래 가들 자연기 남중어도 심중어 주저지스니 근데 나도 샤워보다 저 나도실이야 지가래 시 몽구저래 두주던지 가
침전한 두시 동안 침전한 두시 동안 두시 중
자변은 가 수지 상무 다음에는 녀문 대리시동 선거로다 직전인가 좀 전에 송야 말인데 녀문 대리시동 예번 난신 떡과 대리시동 연구로다 그러다 떡과 쉬워진 거로 한다 공기 한다 some scientist 반응 공한다 엘리크사
Paul Ekman.
공기 때나 가래 직나를 근데 야 대세 몽실식도 완전 타냐 담아서
나래.
자상 갖다 콘조한테 지금 샘 체리고 다시 체리고 저 콘조 심주 체니 다 똑바 담면데 드리는 용기 있으니 콘조 여와 못 체험도 와 아주 흉날 많이 비던데 사가시 흉 자, 땅 아주 뒤를 내배지 보면 좀 change. 그 추울 심을마다 이게 양가게 말입니다. 아주 영라변의 심중을 쓰시셔. 다 디간이야. 대상다 지 믹스의 님십 체계는 다 똑배 릭담다 드리는 것이 그 인식 나로리아. 그 민식이 소스도 와. 디딩 아주 비인날 교니 아주 추울다고 하셔야 돼.
So this raises a very important question because, your question was where are these concepts coming from? And the interesting question is that, His Holiness was referring to earlier meetings when we had discussions about the various types of, mental states, conceptual, non-conceptual, perceptual experiences, some of which are sensory and some of which are non-sensory and so on. And so this raises a very complicated question. And as human beings, we have so many thoughts and concepts that go with those thoughts, and based upon our understanding and experience and so on. And he was then referring to the young Geshe scholars here that in Abhidhamma taxonomy of mental states, we have what is technically referred to as mental factors or chaitas, and in influential text Abhidhamma Samuchaya, which is the influential text, there's a list of 51 such mental factors, but there's another text which refers to 75, and then His Holiness was saying that in listening to Paul Ekman's description of some of the various kind of emotions, even within the category of fear, there seem to be different types of fear, and some of which probably, as individual categories don't exist in the Buddhist literature. So he was saying that we, on the part of the Buddhist scholars, need to look at these, and then maybe we need to enrich our own taxonomy of mental factors. That would be really helpful.
답변은 똑바로 차시네. 어쩌면 유사 나와서 또미제 또 똑고 뒤지도 되니 다든 되는 셔되고 그러다. 또 똑바로 차시네. 배랑 아주 이 유 가서다. 유치라고지 또미 시베 그게 통 신변 내걸로 그냥 딱 상당 내기 두시게윤도 똑바로 거로다. 그봐. 다 뒤주자네 둔지 돈도 나왔어야 돼. 그제서 줘야돼. 로텔. 그봐. 다 미기시에 그 둔지도 만져보시니. 그걸 태그를 유지한바쁘게 통행이지. 지금 알아보다. 계주다 통행이지. 개발자 통행이지. 내가 대가를 하느냐 똑같이 열리대요. 그 상현 도구요. 뒤죽 똑바로 물직도 와. 다들 미수 보이나? 유지도 맞춰야 되는 거라. 다 유지는 신 제니 로를 쳐야 돼요. 똑같이도 와. 대리 유지는 신 제베 다 똑같 쌈직다. 양 똑같 대라. 유지 넘버 7 차대로 지금 연구로 다. 유지 넘버 7 차 대백급지. 유지 넘버 7 차 맞대백급지. 다 유지 넘버 변 차과를 차샤위나. 유지 넘버 7에 차단기세 유지 넘버 7으로 차 넘버 7 차로 쌈그 내급지. 유지 넘버 7 차차에 제일 용소를 숙성부 용돼야지. 똑바로 내가 먹고도 가. 내가 안 배잖아. 야. 민 다녀 잠도 가. 민도 봐. 그래서 어디에 여시 하면서 섬 차연수. 딱 콘서트한테 구두를 제 인도잖아요. 14호 구두 가. 맞으면 가서 어디 토미 구진이랑 아주 캐비도 쓰고 말이지. 이내다 가다미 샴직을 수치하네. 나베 집속으로.
So again, this is in relation to the monastics who are here. For example, in Buddhism, the general kind of distinction drawn between conceptual versus non-conceptual is that conceptual thoughts engage with the events and objects through the mediation of concepts, through language and concepts and so on. So there is, and it's in that sense more indirect engagement. whereas the perceptual experiences are more encompassing and direct. And they also conceptual thoughts engage through the mediation of what we call tunji, generic image. How do you translate tunji?
I translate that as universal. Universal.
Universal.
Like
and also
idea or universal.
It's more like a kind of idea. And one of the characteristics of conceptual thought is that it conflates time and space and kind of, because it imposes a certain universal upon the object. And so you can, even within the concepts, you can see distinctions. For example, when you're actively looking at an object, so at that point you have the perceptual experiences that is occurring, but you can also have at the thought level, thoughts processes as well. But within that thought processes, you can have, for example, if you're already making evaluative judgments of whether this is desirable, undesirable, attractive, good and bad, and so on, you're already at the level of thought as well. So there can be these kind of processes that is occurring when you are actually seeing the object, which very clearly, while you are actually seeing it, or contrast that with a situation where you are not actually seeing the object, but you can imagine you're recalling your memory of that object and start having thought processes. And even there, then when you have that kind of thought processes, you are invoking something, you are imposing the universal, and even there you can have different degrees of clarity of that image. So there seem to be, and then sometimes you can have thought processes that are accompanied by very strong emotion, and sometimes
image.
In response to the image. So, for example, if you have an object of some image of something that is very vivid, which has much more emotive content, then the vividness of that image will be much stronger. So there seem to be different types of, even within the conceptual thoughts, there seem to be different types. So His Holiness was saying that these things are becoming more. So you can have a different qualitative image of the object when it is accompanied by strong emotion and when it is not accompanied by a strong emotion. So there seems to be differences. So
different stages.
Different stages.
Different stages of different kind of.
Different quality of experience. No? Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So these distinctions are actually becoming quite clear as a result of, partly as a result of discussing with neuroscientists and emotion scientists. And although they are not explicitly stated as a kind of a different types in the text, but His Holiness was saying that by bringing them in, we're in some sense doing a service to the great Abhidharma writers like Asanga and Vasubandhu, not because we are greater than them, but out of respect and making service to their work.
Actually, with help of modern scientists. Like that. At that time, no modern science, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know whether that evidence is satisfied with that or not. I mean, is that enough concerning the origins?
Tea break.
Tea break.
I think tea break.
Tea break. Good. Let's take a tea break. So back in 20 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very good.
Your Holiness, we're going to take up a different topic the second session of this morning, a topic which we've talked about in the past when we've been together concerning physics and particularly quantum mechanics. And this has to do with the relationship between causality, which is evidently a very important concept in Buddhism, and we, of course, also have a certain sense of causality that exists as physicists. So we have a physical causality that we work with constantly. But at the same time, there are certain fundamental processes in the world of quantum mechanics which appear to be random, fundamentally random. And there are a number of questions that will arise out of that. So what we'd like to do is to have Anton speak very briefly concerning this fundamental feature of quantum mechanics, of randomness. Then, for the first time, I think, Tunjin Jibba has agreed to give the Tibetan Buddhist perspective on causality and why causality is so important. So we're delighted that he's able to say a few words concerning causality. And then we will open the discussion with you, where we explore the meeting of randomness from the standpoint of modern physics and the important principle of causality from the standpoint of Buddhist philosophy. I'll pose some questions at the end of Anton and Jimpa's discussion and invite you to come in. So we'd like to turn to Anton then to say a few words about causality and randomness in physics.
I want to go, if I may, to facts immediately. Immediately to facts. I mentioned yesterday that one significant development in the last 10 years since we first met was that a new technology is starting to be built on these fundamental quantum phenomena. And this is also true for randomness. Using these quantum phenomena, we now can build what is called random number generator, which has a lot of technical implications. I will first explain briefly how the random number generator works. It's very simple. You have a laser here, which sends a laser light, which sends out photons, and it says weak laser. Why does it say weak laser? It says weak laser because we want the laser, the light, to be so weak that you practically never have two photons at the same time, only one. Okay? Now, only one photon coming out.
So the implication is that if the laser is too strong, there will be more than one.
There would be more than 4 photons at the same time, and then there's okay. Now, what happens? And now describe this apparatus which you are seeing here. So the laser.
So what is the relationship between the photon that is being sent and the laser that is sending it?
The light of the laser.
The light of the laser.
Do you want me now to go through the full laser theory? What is the question? Okay. Let's just take it. Let's just take it as a box which emits one photon at a time. Okay. Let's not worry how it works internally. Okay.
But however, to analyze the characteristics of the effect, you have to analyze the cause.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even there is no cause. Even corona cause, even you have no cause till you have analyzed its nature.
Well, it's actually interesting point because the time, but this leads away again. The time at which an individual photon is emitted is random, But that's okay. Well, no, but this is not important.
Yes, okay.
The important point is now that just let us consider in our mind a single photon. Out of the many which come out of the laser, let's pick out just one and let's consider what it does. Tries along. Well, now I have a naive picture of reality, which we learned before we should not have, but I have it now for practical purposes. Now the photon flies along and then it meets this device here, this thing here, which is what we call a semi-reflecting mirror. It's a mirror which is not so good, a mirror which is not perfect, which reflects half of the light coming in and half of the light goes through. It's like if you would stand in front of such a mirror, you would both see yourself and you would also be able to see through.
Yes.
Okay. Now we ask ourselves, what does this single photon do when it meets such a mirror? Okay? The problem is that the photon is a quantum particle, and therefore it is indivisible. That's observation in many experiments. So it has to go either it has to make a choice. Either it is reflected, going to this detector where I have written down 0, and what does it do there? It makes a click. Or it goes through and is detected there, and it makes a click. Sorry? Cursor. Yeah, it takes a while until it picks it up. No, doesn't. Yeah. So either it is reflected this way and makes a click here, or the photon goes through and makes a click here. Okay. Now we have to back up a little bit. As long as we did not observe the click, both possibilities can happen. So we have to describe the state of the photon here as a superposition of both possibilities. The photon is in both possibilities as long as it is not registered yet. So the photon is, what we learned yesterday, a qubit. Written down, you don't have to written down the same equation. Okay. It's a qubit. It is a superposition of both possibilities. And then this superposition meets the two detectors, and then randomly one detector or the other one responds. But only one can respond. If one detector makes a click, then what we say is that the state collapses and the other detector has no chance to make a click anymore. So this is instant. Okay. So each photon randomly triggers this detector or this. So suppose the first one triggers this one, then I get a 0. I call this 0. I write it down as 0. It's just my way to call it. Just giving a name to the output. The second one might trigger this one. It gives me a 1 and so on. If I do this for many, many photons, I get this kind of sequence. This kind of sequence of numbers, which is a completely random sequence. This is a completely random sequence, and this can be tested. There are tests which a random sequence has to fulfill. For example, you have to have the same number of zeros and ones. You have to have this 50-50 zeros and ones. Then you have to have, in 25% of the cases, you have to have, let me put it in a more direct way. If you have a 0, in half of the cases, the next number must be also a 0. In half of the cases, the next number must be a 1, if it's really random, and so on and so on. Now, this kind of random sequence has been tested. We wrote, big, these computer disks full of these random sequences, sent it to some company in Germany which makes random number generators, not quantum, but other ones. And they said this is the best random sequence they have ever seen in their life. Okay. Now, what are these random numbers good for? You need them in technology. They are good for in many things. One thing is you can use random numbers to encrypt information. If I want to send you a secret message, and if I mix this secret message with random numbers, then a spy has no chance to catch it. It's very big. It's very big business.
So, what about how the recipient must make sense of this? How can they?
Well, that is a very good question, Your Holiness. The point is that the recipient must actually know the random numbers which you used to encrypt your information. He must know what kind of random numbers you use To encrypt the
information the sound on the bad and the random number patches, gaming number patches, the gaming number patches, Karachebati, Panamoli, Lapor.
Oh, really?
No.
And that's a big problem in standard cryptography. You know, cryptography is used today a lot between banks and also in industry, because you don't want the competition to know what you are sending around. And so the big problem is how do you make sure that the recipient has the same random sequence, because only doing that he can decipher the message. And this is a big problem in standard cryptography, which is solved by quantum physics. Because if you use
the information better on the encryption the Dolia, Yorkshire was Kazana, Chisam with Tampa Serbian, Panango, the Chialia, the Sound Chilo Mandra, the Pentagon, the Panamo, she and Capuchigora, the Dino to the quantum key, on a salt to yours. Okay.
So this was a brief mentioning of some new technology which is starting now, and Arthur said that
I'm just posing a question to Anton while you were talking, and maybe I'll pose it then more generally because it's something we might all consider. So we now have a string of numbers where there's no pattern; they're entirely random in their generation. What does this imply potentially concerning the nature of causality? We have a sequence of numbers without pattern, without any kind of organization. And as far as we can tell, the way in which the 1 or 0 is produced, the collapse that takes place, is what we would say is uncaused. There is no way of predicting the 1 or the 0. So this would seem to indicate that there's no physical cause that we can identify for the production of the 1 or the 0. I was going to ask Anton what you think this implies for causality.
From a naive perspective, the cause can be described as the laser, the photons, but the effect is random. The cause, though, is very well characterized. I mean, unless, correct me if that naive interpretation is...
Well, there could be... Well, there could actually be, in principle, many explanations.
Yeah.
Right? So, but you know, we physicists have thought about that. It's not, that we haven't thought about this possibility. One possibility would be the laser. Another possibility would be that something happens at the mirror. Now, the point is that we can exclude such causes explanation. Why can we exclude that? We can exclude that because we can bring entanglement to our help.
Entanglement.
Enchevêtrement français. Because what you can do now, is you can do the following kind of experiment. You create a pair of entangled photons, and you send each one to a beam splitter. Okay? And then each one behaves randomly. Okay? Completely randomly. But they would do the same. So they would either both be reflected or both go through. So there's perfect correlation. Then
So in that sense, there is a certain kind of regularity. There's a pattern here.
Absolutely. So this pattern actually seems to indicate even more that there might be a cause, right? And that was actually the idea of our good old friend Albert Einstein. He thought that he actually said, you know, he did not like this randomness. He said, famous saying, God does not play dice. To which actually Niels Bohr answered, stop telling God how to run the world.
Niels Bohr
So let's come back. So this was the idea of Einstein actually, that this perfect correlation seems to indicate some regularity. And there was a debate in the history of physics from Einstein was 35. There was a debate from the very beginning whether there is an underlying causal structure or not. Okay? An underlying causal structure which we don't know yet in quantum mechanics. Which may be something coming from the source or something in the mirrors or whatsoever. And then something really great happened. In 1965, building on ideas of David Bohm, whom you knew very well, building on ideas of David Bohm, the Irish physicist John Bell showed that this model is in contradiction to experiments.
This model being a causal, deterministic model of
Right.
all classes. You could say that there's a whole class of such models which are eliminated.
He showed that such a model actually could explain this kind of perfect correlations, but if you expand the experiment a little bit, to also include situations where you do not have perfect correlations, then this model makes a very different prediction than what quantum mechanics does. As a consequence, people did experiments and they showed that the model is wrong.
The deterministic model is wrong.
So this is the nature of our argument. The nature of our argument is that we assume that there is a cause, where, by the way, the interesting point is that we don't even have to know what the cause is. We just assume that there is a cause which causes the particle to go this way and not this way. We build up a model, using just logic. What you might ask, what are we using? We are only using standard logic, not any quantum physics in the model. It's very important, just standard logic. We make predictions for new experiments. We test it and we show that the predictions are wrong. And therefore we conclude that the cause cannot exist. That's in a nutshell so we have a mystery, we have a real mystery. How can we have two events which are perfectly correlated, have no cause? Erwin Schrödinger, Austrian physicist, who was also one of the founders of quantum mechanics, said that this feature is the one which forces us to abandon all our cherished views how the world works.
내가 때원 데려자 다간다 지 예매게 중원들이야 규요가 시작이 돈을 대세 대백갑라 데빌 봄 느껴 봐 규요가 시작 돈 저거 다디 아니 실리샤제 아니 로직 리버 배주지네 리버 기마 배주 제백갑이야 아니 프레딕션 제하기 the Taoche Chebe Kabia, and quantum Namsha Mabuch than gain to Goris. There's a Gumeba Shisha, Chundele, Gumeb Gaming, Chundele, Gumeba Shisha to Golani, quantum Namsha Mabuch, Detunish, Yogoris. The Inzana Shruti, the quantum crown, the Namjuma, which Yoruba, quantum level. That the Chundele, Guyoba Shisha, to Deshajabina. Nangema Bush, that Gumeba Shisha to Deshajabina, and quantum Shataran, Dedish, the Dinzan Shrutin Gurgi, and that Nezu Teletenis. Sometimes I to young and but such a city that you Judeta, Namsha Mambuchi, Chilutango heads get them lake those soon shop race.
Now, what we'd like to do at this point is to pose a couple of questions, you could say, to our Buddhist colleagues. And then we're going to ask Jinpa if he will provide a short account of causality in Buddhist thinking, and then we will open for discussion. You could say the first question is, why is this so important to Buddhism? Why is causality so crucial to your way of thinking? Why, if this is true, is this such a difficulty for Buddhist thought? The second question is science's view of causality too limited? This is something which Evan Thompson raised. When we say there is no cause, what we're considering, of course, is no physical cause. We're not talking about other types of causes which you may consider to be important. Is there something we should be thinking about with regards to other types of causality or other notions and understandings of causality than our limited understanding of causality? So the first question is really, why is this so important to you? What is at stake? And the second has to do, what is your notion of causality, including factors that we might be excluding? But before going there, I would like to have first, just for the rest of the science community, some understanding of how you think about causality generally from a Buddhist perspective. And so I invite Jinpa, Tunchen Jinpa, to give a brief presentation. Anton will be working the slides that Jinpa has prepared.
Your Holiness, I feel very slightly nervous and also embarrassed to be speaking in front of His Holiness in public. Actually, this is the first time I've done in my own voice, so I would like to ask your kind permission to be able to step out of my role as your interpreter and speak in my own voice. The last time I spoke in front of His Holiness in my own voice was as a young monk student in one of the South Indian monasteries when His Holiness visited and we were asked to stage, debate in front of His Holiness. At that time it was quite a nerve-wracking experience. I hope this time, hopefully, as a more older person, I won't be too nervous. But if I seem a little nervous,
because labels.
So if I seem, if I seem a bit nervous and especially flustered, please bear with me. Yesterday we had in Evans, actually right at the beginning, His Holiness really pointed out a very important aspect, and that has been very crucial for the development and refinement of Buddhist thought, which is the presence of challenges to the established Buddhist views, and how throughout the history of development of Buddhist thought, challenges posed by other sophisticated intellectual traditions have been crucial in the development of the Buddhist understanding of the world, and particularly in both understanding of the external world and the mental world. We then had Evan raise some points with regard to the fracture points, and where there is a potential divergence between Buddhism and science. And the key area was the area of the understanding of the nature of consciousness. And one important question that was raised was the question of downward causation, the causation from the mental to the physical, and how this could be a potential in the area where there would be major divergence. We also had today and also Anton's presentation today, we brought up the question of randomness and its implication for the law of causality. And So what I would like to do is to step back a bit and present why is, in order to appreciate why is causality so important for the Buddhist perspective, to understand the kind of the place of causality in the development of the Buddhist thought, going back to the Buddha himself, and so that the scientist particularly will have an understanding of a more contextual basis of this notion. Before I do that, I would like to actually draw your attention to two guiding principles that have been behind the development of the Buddhist thought. These are the ethical motivation of seeking elevation of suffering and the soteriological goal of seeking liberation. And these are the two guiding principles underlying Buddhist philosophical thinking. In fact, one could argue that from the Buddhist point of view, the validity and efficacy of a worldview, that is our understanding of the world, and particularly the understanding of our place as human beings within that world, that validity and efficacy of such a worldview ultimately needs to be judged in terms of these two criteria. How much of that view is underpinned by this ethical motivation of seeking elevation of suffering, and how much of that worldview promotes the project of seeking liberation. So in that respect, perhaps there is a major area of divergence between the scientific inquiry into understanding the nature of reality and the Buddhist inquiry into the understanding of nature of reality, and appreciation of that, I feel, is very important. So let me begin by going back to the historical Buddha himself, who all the Buddhist traditions see as the source of their understanding and insight. So I have on the slide two almost identical statements that are attributed to the Buddha. The first one is from a Mahayana Sutra. So that's the tradition which His Holiness refers to as the Nalanda tradition, and that is the tradition that is represented here in this dialogue in the person of His Holiness, and also the presence of the monastics here. So in this particular tradition, the famous statement that is attributed to the Buddha reads, "When there is, that is, diyube." And this arising, that arises, with ignorance as condition, there are formations. So this is slightly enigmatic, but this is attributed to the Buddha, and it really captures the essence of the understanding of causality.
What does formations mean here?
Formation means coming into being, creation. And the last line is really more technical, because he's relating to this principle in the context of what is known as the 12 links of dependent origination. But for our purposes, it's not essential to go into that detail. The second statement is from Theravada sources, which represents the Pali tradition. And you can see there is almost identical statement. When there is, that is, this arising, that arises. And the difference is that we have two more statements there. When this is not, the negation side is presented, which is interesting. So what this presents for us Buddhists is the principle of dependent origination. And arguably, one could say that the principle of dependent origination is, from the philosophical point of view, the most important concept in the Buddhist tradition, both for the Theravada tradition and for the Mahayana tradition represented here. And this is a philosophical perspective where the origination and arising of all phenomena, whether it is the existence of the wider cosmos as a whole, or whether it is the existence of our own selves, or whether it is the existence and origination of even a single specific event, they are understood in terms of the coming together of causes and conditions. So this is the important point. So let me have the second slide. So this is a statement from His Holiness, where His Holiness presents, this is from his book, where His Holiness presents a very influential author, Asanga, 4th century, who captures what he understood to be the importance and the significance of this principle of dependent origination. And I'll read that straight. First, Asanga talks about the three conditions of dependent origination. First, I will quote, first is the condition of the absence of preceding intelligence. Asanga rejects the possibility of the universe as being the creation of a preceding intelligence, arguing if one posits such an intelligence, it will have to be totally, if it will have to totally transcend cause and effect. Second is the condition of impermanence, which determines that the very causes and conditions that they give rise to the world of dependent origination are themselves impermanent and subject to change. The third is the condition of potentiality. This principle refers to the fact that something cannot be produced from just anything. Rather, for a particular set of causes and conditions to give rise to a particular set of effects or consequences, there must be some kind of natural relationship between them. So you can see that here, Asanga, in unpacking the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination, identifies these three key factors. So let me go to the next statement, which actually unpacks this in a greater detail. And here, it's quite interesting to see how, Asanga reads in the teaching on the dependent origination a lot more than simply causes and conditions, and draws out the implications. And this is from his Abhidhamma Samuccaya, that the text that His Holiness referred to, where the list of 51 mental factors are presented, compendium of knowledge. So I will, this is a rough translation. The fact of dependent origination is the meaning of there being no creator. So you can see Asanga explicitly ties it up with the rejection of a notion of creation. The fact of originating with causes, the fact of there being no sentience, so either in a sense of sentient beings with discrete egos, the fact of being other dependent, the fact of there being no prior movement of intelligence, the fact of being impermanent, the fact of being momentary, the fact of unceasing continuity of causes and effects, the fact of causes and effects being commensurate, which is the idea of there have to be a natural relationship, the fact of variedness of causes and conditions. This is the notion of multiplicity of causes and conditions. The fact of causes and effects being specifically determined, that there are, one set of relations can lead to another set of relations, but not just anything. There is a kind of a... This is the meaning of dependent origination. So, Asang, you can see that the dependent origination, which originally was read as a simple explanation of the law of causality, but now has a much richer appreciation, which has all these implications. Now, if I can go to the next slide. Now, what we see here, of course, this is partly my own personal interpretation. What we see in the Buddhist thinking is a sort of an attempt to move away from the language of, cause, more to the language of conditions. Mm-hmm. And this is now so because in non-Buddhist, this is the cultural milieu in which the Buddha is teaching and the Buddhist thinkers are developing their ideas, there was an emphasis on original cause. The first cause, the notion of this metaphysical sense of cause. And what the Buddha and the Buddhists are trying to do is to show the complexity of the origination of things, that there is no first cause. The notion of first cause, the notion of single cause is incoherent. The origination and arising of things has to be understood in the context of multiplicity of conditions coming together. So there seems to be this emphasis. And in fact, in one of the very early Buddhist Abhidhamma text, this is in fact the last book of the Pali Abhidhamma, Ngobadidu, there is a list of 24 different kinds of conditions. And the attempt here is to try to come up with a systematic account of how a different phenomena can affect another phenomena. And there's an attempt to understand different types of conditions. And the Pali text lists 24 such of these. But later, these were narrowed down to 4 conditions. And this is the most kind of, standard understanding of causation, where we identify 4 conditions. So the first one is causal conditions. And this refers to mainly kind of the primary conditions, the factors that give rise to. Second is percept-object condition. So here, the four conditions are related primarily to a kind of a mental event, such as a perceptual occurrence of a perceptual event, like seeing this bottle of water here. So the percept-object condition is the presence of the bottle in front of you. Then you have immediately preceding condition, which is the continuum of awareness, and just the immediate preceding awareness that kind of opens up the possibility for that perception. And the fourth is the dominant or governing condition. So in the case of perception of this bottle of water, it is the sensory eye faculty. So the multiplicity of the conditions that were explained in the early text were now kind of subsumed into these four main conditions. And furthermore, these four conditions are then subsumed into two primary categories of cause. If I can have the next. So again, this is a citation from His Holiness's own book, and this is on page 131. So, and Evan already referred to these two types of causation, the substantive causation, and in Evan's language, it was substantive causation and cooperative causation. So I will read from His Holiness's words. Buddhism proposes two principal categories of cause. These are the substantial cause or material cause, and this is actually somewhat analogous to Aristotle's notion of material cause, and the contributory or complementary cause, which is somewhat analogous to Aristotle's notions of efficient cause, fairly similar. And take the example of a clay pot. The substantial cause refers to the stuff that turns into a particular effect. So the substantive causation, cause and effects need to share a similarity in nature, namely the clay that becomes the pot. By contrast, all the other factors that contribute towards bringing about the pot, such as the skill of the potter himself, and the kiln that fired the clay, remain complementary in that they make it possible for the clay to turn into the pot. So they actually contribute. This distinction between the substantial and the contributory causes of a given event or an object is of utmost importance for understanding the Buddhist theory of causation. And this came up briefly in Evan's presentation and John's response to that how this idea of substantial causation, where the cause and effect need to share a similar nature. Yes?
You read, for the last word, you read causation. Here
Sorry, consciousness. Theory of consciousness. Yeah, theory of consciousness. Yeah. So His Holiness emphasizes that understanding of this notion of causation is critical in appreciating the Buddhist position on consciousness, that especially when you talk about downward causation from the mental to the physical, and there can be upward causation as well, even from the Buddhist point of view. So the causation process goes both ways. So what I would like to do now is to conclude by listing some of what I see as the key points that we need to remember when we are engaging in the dialogue here. Can I go to the next one? Oh, I cannot. Can we enlarge it? No, we can't.
Well, we can put it on. We could put it on two slides.
Okay. So what I can do is I can actually read that out.
If you want, I can quickly put it on two slides.
Yeah, you want to quickly put it on two slides?
Right. Right. Insert new slide.
Yeah.
Just cut it roughly here.
So as you can see that I'm new in speaking in Holiness presence, but also I'm new with PowerPoint. So.
Uh-oh. What's happening?
No, just a moment.
Yeah, okay. Control V.
A little bit too small.
Actually, I can read.
Make a third one. Just one moment.
The top box. Okay.
Just one moment. Control X and then add another view. Insert a new slide to the last one, and then we have it all. So now we have it all. So here's the first one. Larger now.
So the points that I think we need to remember here from the point of view of.
Slide view. Sorry, down here. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good now.
So, by the way, I've given the title Causation in Buddhist Thought instead of Buddhist Theory of Causation, because this is mainly partly as an academic. I don't want to suggest a homogeneity that doesn't really exist in the tradition that has such a long history of 2,500 years. There are internal debates on the nature of conditions and the relationship, and whether or not cause needs, in order to produce an effect, has need to have a causal power by virtue of its own essence and so on. So anyway, so the first point is so no supernatural causation through prior design by an intelligence. So this is very important for the Buddhist. The origination of the world and everything has to be accounted for within the world, not something outside. And no causal agent that is outside the causal effects, cause and effects complex. So again, the causal agents have to be part of that complex, not standing outside. And the third one is the logical untenability of uncaused events. So this is
very germane.
We will have discussion with you, Anton. And the so the two main arguments that are presented is that if there are uncaused events, uncaused arising, origination, then that event should occur all the time, or it should not occur at all, because there is no reason why this cannot be. So it's a kind of a logical argument that is used, and we can discuss later. And the third factor is causality operates both in the physical and mental domains, as well as across the two domains. So this is again an important point. And the next one is that in themselves, the causal processes occur naturally and can be seen as kind of blind. So even, for example, in the case of karmic causation, karma has no volition of its own. So it is still kind of a blind process. Next one. Now, in the light of Dharmakirti, the causal relations are thought to be constructs, and they are unreal. What you have is basically events, one coming after another in a form of a succession within a certain pattern of regularity, but the relations are our own constructions. And then the next one is effect to cause inference is valid. So you can make inferences from the effect to the cause, but not from the cause to the effect. And the only inference you can make from the cause to the effect is a probability or a potential for that effect, but nothing more than that. But you can make inference from the cause, from the effect to the cause.
There must have been a cause if there was an effect.
Yeah.
But you can only predict probabilistically.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is an important point. And the and the next one is, in the light of Nagarjuna, no conditions have causal power by virtue of its own essence. So in fact, the concept of essence and causality are thought to be incompatible. For Nagarjuna, by the notion of essence imply a self-enclosed and completeness, which then has no openness to effect coming from outside. The next one is that because of the emphasis on understanding origin in terms of multiplicity of conditions, there is no suggestion for causal determinism, because the emphasis is really on the multiplicity of the events, factors giving rise to an event. And the final one, which is a suggestion, and this has been made by an English academic, scholar of Buddhism, which I find very helpful. So I'll read that. The Buddhist causal theory, based on the principle of dependent origination, is best read not in terms of the standard causal theory model, that event A will cause B. It is better read in terms of a looser model, that B occurs because there was A. Or if there is a B, then there must have been an A. So again, it's from the effect to the cause, where the perspective adopted is primarily from the effect. rather than from that of the cause. So I find this suggestion quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chimpa. Thank you very much indeed. Now we only have about 10 minutes before we have to go to lunch. That's a little fast, but okay, 5 minutes. We can perhaps find a little time this afternoon to come back to this, or on other occasions during the course of the week to take up this topic. But I'd like to first see if Your Holiness would like to add anything to Jimpa's remarks concerning causality and its importance in Buddhist thought. Why is this so crucial? Are we too limited in our view of causation in science?
His Holiness was saying that from his point of view, the area where there needs to be a lot of thinking, a lot of difficult thinking, is how the causation from the mental to the physical really operates. That seems to be really the crux of the problem. His Holiness is sharing with the monks that
나는 주기도 도대 대고 페너지를 워보다 다들 년龄이 줄 삼담이나 아주 친내 지대도 차샤나 나는 미류 라발도 차샤비나 그걸 뒤 참지 가는 로그로다 디 레기 기어래 말씀은 아이나서 거 디군중사 아이나서 딱고 게임 먹고시 뒤에 와네 아니 친내 지대 차야 지다 뒤에 먹고지고 와네 주기 풍부 차야성이 디가 안다 레지도 예듯이.
So the area where there's a lot of difficulty for His Holiness is how can we conceive and understand this interaction between the mental and the physical, and particularly with respect to the Buddhist theory of karma, where, for example, if you look at the origin of the universe, the world that we're inhabiting, and also the evolution of our human body, on the material level, the origination of the arising of the human body can be understood in terms of the physical explanation, and that cause and effects at the physical level can be understood in scientific terms. But given that this phenomenon has a direct bearing on a sentient experience of pain and pleasure, there has to be a karmic role in the origination of it. And also in the Buddhist understanding, even the world that we inhabit is really thought to be a result to some extent of our karma as well, because this is one of the two origins of suffering, karma and the afflictions. But how that affects and what is the mechanism, that seems to be really a difficult issue for the Buddhists. So, for example, with the model of the two types of cause, the substantive causation and the cooperative causations, so with respect to human body and the world, if you trace that kind of substantial causation, this is purely natural process.
Space particles.
We can go all the way to what the Buddhists refer to as space particles, to the beginning of the origin of the universe.
직전 나마차 가서 나마동 치마 마셔 봐라기 또 뒤틀어 주고 봐. 그러니까 시도 수지라고도 차야기 뒤도 야야 대시면이나 그런 쉽게 나눠야 가래 모두 저 통만 메스. 다시 링데도 줄 사람도 주는 것이 내가 왜 통화도 이거보다 그래요. 서다디 통화 메시지 손대주다 드르디 디 내가기 가지고 내가 소리 해. 뒤 참원티 대기면이나 Your
Holiness.
So His Holiness is wondering whether the role of karma has to be understood more in the cooperative causation process, rather than this substantive causation process. He was asking the Gishis. So if you trace the origin of our, the universe to the point of the beginning, and Buddhist point of view, there's this space particles in an empty state. And in one of the Indian texts, the 400 verses, there is a suggestion that there is no beginning to the to phenomena, you can say. There is no beginning. And so His Holiness is saying that you cannot...
And increase.
No, there can be an end, but there is no beginning. But of course here we are talking in terms of its causal continuum, not in terms of the phenomenon itself. The phenomenon itself is a momentary
on this beginning, certainly.
No.
No start to the causal chain. No beginning to the causal chain.
That there, Kazan was occasion, not let me show Nanone, Juan Shigova, Juan Rapa, and Juana, Juanaga, Puganaga Tivina, Puganaga Teve, Juana Shenduzane, Chi Juana, Nanga Juana, that you do some Nanga Juana, Nanga Jualia, Juana Rapa, Juana Chow, Shinto Chow. The Tartu is a Juana out the Shinto Chow, Sonzing Long was another set. Juana did joy of that. That dinner than Georgics, she was just subtle one than George Younger Yerdo. That nations is that. That the district day, and from another 70 would change one into one of their. Right? Oh, that Shingi, some tumor to the China, Lulia, Chita, Pinto to there. The Pinto Rabada Acadina, some duration in Gurvata. The Pinto taught the better China, Najava, Tobolin. Then there's been a Dulune, the savageting is the dragon, could show in. They could show in. And savageting is the church was we, Marim, most of that, may charge in Guava. The church was Marwa. Just say, oh, I think it's a tree of the Mongolia, church was so shady, you mother made it in Guava. That's savageting is really most of that. June charging edge child into that the Karasa winati. So Tanga the shared today. Kada lung similar and do you want you to join in? Any go join the Kujotet not down to as you were. So that the condition was the in the lung of Sangava. Shouldn't have the lung of Sangava, Tangzi to control it with Chavina. That causes the West of the Chavina. That Lusun do want you to Jungorva. That D, John to Chowdelia, Casore, that do want you to Indusane, tell a Dembe, any Nangajuma Chomo, tell it in a Nangajuma Rapa, tell them the Chinjualia, Casore, do want you to Junga. The quantum chance answer your single mare.
So His Holiness was saying that his own personal kind of speculation, kind of the working kind of theory right now is perhaps there is basis for some understanding in the Vajrayana tradition. Yesterday we referred to this energy awareness kind of composite, the union, the non-duality. And similarly, in Vajrayana, there is an understanding that there is an intimate connection between the elements in the natural world. And in the Buddhist Vajrayana description, in addition to the 4 natural elements, you have the space as counted as one of the elements. So there are 5 natural elements. And there is an intimate relation perceived between the natural elements that exist in the world and those in the human body. And within the human body, there are different levels of the subtlety of that natural element, ultimately grounded in this.
Not only human being, sentient beings,
all sentient, yes, all sentient beings. And within that, these natural elements, there are different degrees of subtlety, finally, converging upon this very subtle prana, or vayu is the Sanskrit term, but the energy. And so the yogis who, because in the text it's explained that the yogis who have, and this subtlemost energy is really, the technical term used is the energy that is imbued with five rays, 5 lights, yeah, kind of. That's the
radiating 5 lights.
Radiating 5 lights. That's the description, and the understanding is that the yogi who has gained mastery over this energy is then able to, this is the kind of yogi we were talking about, who can willfully invoke the experience of dissolution that occurs at death, so that you can have the experience of clear light. So when you have that kind of mastery, you have gained mastery over the forces, the energy, which is then able to exert control and over the macroscopic level of energy within one's body, and through this way have an impact upon the external world as well. So maybe there is external matter. So maybe there is a mechanism suggested there, but His Holiness was saying, of course, this is quite unclear. So just as in the quantum world, you have a lot of unresolved enigmas, kind of causing confusion. Similarly, in the Buddhist world, we have these areas of enigma and confusion.
Oh, the Buddhist way, at least my Buddhist understanding, a lot of confusion.
And I think we can say it's the same thing from the quantum mechanical standpoint, that there are speculations and tentative suggestions, but many mysteries still remain. And I'm sure we'll come back to this theme of causation, especially the mental causation, karmic causes, and so forth, as we go forward. Maybe just to make one final comment concerning this asymmetry that you emphasize so strongly between cause and effects and causes. I think you find a similar asymmetry in quantum mechanics. That is to say, once there has been an effect, for example, detection at one of the two detectors, 0 or 1, then you can tell a story, a kind of causal story about what must have happened in the already existent past.
Well, I don't think that I agree.
Okay. We'll end on that disagreement. You don't take Wheeler's suggestion?
Yes.
Wheeler talks about it that way, huh?
I know that.
Okay. Perhaps I think after lunch, more agreement will come.
More disagreements after lunch.
More disagreement. More disagreement.
장사하고가 다니 부르게 다 고백이 전신류게 지강성 방송 말에 편주는 지도 그러지 말해.
그래서 다버지 레고다 용어별 돈에 주샤야 매버지. 근데 지지를 떼.
편주 너저별 누구를 안 했어야 다 편주 중을 쓴 거야.
Quantum physics la ngochi dendrup go marwal. Ngochi tombani na consulent dore.
I think the part of the problem is, it's not a single essence and distinct identities. It was essentially identical, but conceptually distinct.
In other words,
because the notion of essence is rejected.
Yes, that's what I'm pointing at.
So the confusion here is that when it said that they're essentially identical, that doesn't mean they have to be essentially real.
They can be identical in being empty of intrinsic existence.
Did you want to say something, Anton?
Well, I mean, the notion of time for physics is something like that.
Yeah.
Because in physics, we do not want to explain what time is. We just, all we need is, we need some rules how to measure time. And this is done by clocks.
So it's a relational concept. It's a relational concept.
It's a relational
You're not interested in the essence of time.
The same thing with space.
In how to measure it.
The same thing can be said of space, right? That it's a relational concept. Time and space, you could say, are relational concepts, and they are defined. Now,
so what language would you use? I mean, intrinsic existence is a kind of a Buddhist language, so. So, you want to elaborate on that?
The question here is whether the notion of what would constitute the kind of reality that you're seeking here.
Reality is
what is the term when you're using it? It's not intrinsically existent. What do you mean by that term? Because you're kind of using a Buddhist terminology there. What would be your own language for that?
So, for example, if we take the example of time, we both agree that it's a relational concept. It's a construct which is, labeled in relation to something else. So, and that suggests there is a rejection of something. So it's not objectively grounded. It's not intrinsically real.
That's right.
So, what do we mean by? So this implies that anything that fulfills the criteria of that kind of objectivity is intrinsically real. Something that is not relationally constructed.
I missed the last part.
Right. Right.
So something that's not relationally constructed is therefore intrinsically real. And the question here is, what do you mean?
Relational terms. And in the Buddhist, particularly the Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy, perspective on things as relational. But it seems to be...
다안도 공기 가서 가리는 다도 objectively 니 구거다. 이네다 objectively 니야 여덟시. 그러다 objectively 니야 여덟시 레디 이네다디 뭐문 진두자네. 다 유진의 데네 다나 야가사 도시합진 거. 다 고소.
나 고소도 objective 때는 요거 그랬으라고.
디시샤로.
let's not read.
디니야 매르체니 우투체. 다 외면이 들어서 디 말아.
His Holiness is wondering whether there is a kind of two ways of, bringing up this relational perspective on reality.
No.
So this is in response, relation to your question about
your question, your comment.
Your comment about this, reference to Mark, that how
about what?
Ernst Mark.
Right.
His Holiness feels that perhaps there are two different kind of perspectives here. For example, in the case of Buddhist Madhyamaka, who rejects any notion of intrinsic existence, the reason why they felt the need they felt the need to come up with a relational picture of reality is because of the understanding that regardless of however much you search for the essence of things, they are unfindable. So this objective pursuit...
objectively not exist.
Right. The sort of pursuit of understanding...
So there is no way to pinpoint this is this. Yet, there is a reality. Fact is there. Now, therefore, now there is no other alternative except because connected to it.
Except to look at it in terms of relations, in terms of interconnections. So that's one way of looking at relational picture of world. So, however, in the case of physics, since the inquiry is motivated by understanding reality, so there is an assumption that you must be, find something.
No.
Uncovering the object.
No,
at that time, the 19th century.
Historically.
19th century. Right, and therefore, what Mach said was a big step forward.
Yeah.
For that very reason, you just pointed out, in 19th century, there was really this feeling to search for reality.
Oh.
And what Mach said was a big step forward. But he said, no, it's about the relations.
저자도 공기
You see?
두두 유중원에 니아 매대버지 가서 그래 통내 아니 두두시고는
So in that case, would you say Marx's kind of insight is to point out that actually this objective quest,
objective picture of reality. In this case, the wave-particle duality gives us an example of something quite different. As opposed to coming to a single picture of an objective world, we find contradictory pictures of that world. And we find this again and again. This is not only in wave-particle duality. This is a common feature of quantum mechanics, and also, if we had time, which we will not do, relativity theory also creates, you could say, a picture of reality which is not given as a single objective world in itself. All right? Now, yesterday you commented and said, well, maybe there's a single essence but conceptual differences. That's actually quite an interesting idea. But I would say, and I don't know if Anton would agree, but I would say that quantum mechanics and relativity theory, that is to say modern physics, would say that there is no experimental way for us to determine that single essence, to come to a picture or an understanding of that single essence.
What do we mean?
No. Quantum mechanics.
So it remains hypothetical. And from the standpoint of physics, if it's only hypothetical, then we have no use for it. You could say. So then the question arises, is there an alternative strategy? Right? If we have a...
The time said matter.
So what about the concept of time? Wouldn't be considered part of the matter?
The concept of time?
Yeah, time. So in
not matter.
Concept of time. Gosh.
You know, time you heard that.
Yeah. For example,
objectively,
so time exists, but you cannot ground it objectively.
You cannot ground time in an objective...
but still you can conceive of time.
You can conceive of time, but this comes to actually something that George and I might be talking about this afternoon. That is to say, what is the origin of time?
So this this difficulty of concept of time suggests that something that can be conceived need not necessarily be groundable in objective reality.
In an objective reality other than what you experience with the senses.
Yes.
Yeah. For example, we would say that time is given by, for example, like a clock, where you have the tick-tock of the clock. You can ask whether that is objectively given in and of itself, or whether, that it has its own intrinsic existence, or whether that is given in relationship. Right? Is it given in relationship to the observer, for example? And physics...
intrinsic
existence.
By intrinsically real.
So what would
be some?
Can I come in there?
Please.
There is something. I mean, I would like to quote here a famous philosopher, physicist, Ernst Mach. Ernst Mach lived in Vienna at the end of the 19th century, and he is the only person whom Einstein acknowledges of having him inspired for relativity theory. And Ernst Mach said something very important. He said, every statement in physics has to be a statement about relations between observable quantities. So physics is relational. We have, in physics, it is the great success of modern physics, starting with Galilei, that we have abandoned the question as to the nature of things. We only talk about relations and how to measure them.
Mark Einstein relativity theory now to Mark it on a Savani Johnson, Mark Shadan welcome to Benalas. You moving is a carres to Tigiomaris. You pension Dover more carres. Dotankanis Dugures, relation Yanton Dugures. Then do welcome to Benalia, yet among Pucci.
Mix room with
The mix room with Chula. Mix room with Chula. The Motongo, Miss room with Chula. Observed the Ganda, Munjugu Chuli, and Nampenzu in the Dotankanis Dugure. Dover more carres, Jedus drama though. Yunguberashi carres. Chegi Omaris, the Mogonalia, Yarjedu among Bucci, Tatan Diton, Chinje, 편준 되병고 간에 간에 또당 간에 되고 그랬어. 근데 되병고 되be 남샤로 그랬어. 또당 간에 디렉트는 제가 제가 짐브레스.
So I think we would say that since did you want to say something?
야, 내가 니도가.
네.
그게 그 objectively 자가 진짜 많이 그것도 편은 되게 어려. 다 되베고네. 다 샤나 모두 매빈 주잖아요. 엔코 두두인다데 자가 준 거다.
네.
따고 당분이네. 딘 저가도 된 세베이나. 디산에 지금 그 편준 떠다 근데 떠도와. 다 디장장에 잔주신 줘야 지금 뭐.
네.
그러다 무슨 내주직 그 가서래. 또 동주 시작하네. 그 자유르잖아요. 니좀 매빈 인자. 펜을 지기 아래 니좀 매자버려. 딘주잔 따고 다 떠니 샤나 모두 매빈 주잖아요. 디찬에 다 두루만에 떼고 그래야지. 다다 직송송.
네.
다들 남중아도 들어봤다.
네. 나쁘대.
다 오늘 조금만 들어봤다. 안도 공간도 손대야 돼야. 당근에다 가서 그래. 뭐 가리네. 제가 이제 탄에다 저에 들으더니 이미지잖아요. 그니 편주 숨지기도 안 했다. 자고리 사소를 라베기네 안 돼서 가가서.
No. So Holiness is wondering that given that there is this kind of similarity between modern physics way of looking at things and
Good morning, Your Holiness. I'd like to begin this morning by reviewing just briefly some of the themes that we talked about yesterday, and then also to pose a certain question to you that I think connects to the understanding we have of quantum mechanics and some of the implications of quantum mechanics for our understanding of reality. As you remember, yesterday we saw through the so-called double-slit experiment that the results of that experiment led to a necessity of two logically contrary or contradictory explanatory ideas. So in the one case, one set of results from the experiment led to an impression or an understanding in terms of waves. A slightly different experiment gave results which, when we applied inference, led to the idea of a particle. These are actually logically contradictory pictures. A single entity cannot be both a wave and a particle. Now, this feature of quantum mechanics
Regrouping.
다들 저거 만드셔죠. 그렇죠. Young scholar.
Good young scholar.
Very good one.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to everyone, I should say. Yeah. This feature of quantum mechanics is very prevalent, namely that one phenomenon, one, you could say, result of an experiment, we use logical inference, leads to one picture of reality. A related experiment, a related result, leads to a contradictory picture of reality. Niels Bohr called this, the scientist Niels Bohr called this complementarity. That for a complete...
Complementary, sorry.
That for a complete account of the phenomena that we have, we need pictures of reality which are impossible to have at the same time. They are contradictory. Now I want to emphasize how... Okay, so we start again. One of the features of quantum mechanics, as I said, which is very different from classical mechanics, from classical physics, is this principle of complementarity. In classical science, you have many experimental results, and those experimental results all converge or create a coherent